Thank you so much for joining us today for the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation's Small Capital Grants Program info session. My name's Amy Hampe. I'm a program officer here at the Foundation. So even though I don't have my video on today, I would like you to be able to put a face with the name. My colleague Dave Rubenstein is here with me as well, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the questions that you have about the program. Here's what we'll cover today. I'll give you a quick overview of the Foundation itself and where the Small Capital Grants Program fits in. In particular, we're going to look at some of the previous grants that have been made, the eligibility and requirements, and our focus today will be on the top 10 most frequently asked questions we get about the program, and then we'll leave lots of time for your questions as well. So the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation looks to make positive change in Greater Boston, particularly in economically disadvantaged communities. Today we have 15 trustees across 3 generations of the Smith family that oversee the foundation. They're giving away approximately $14 million annually, and they focus on promoting greater health, educational attainment, and economic mobility. We're lucky to still have Mr. Smith with us today. He's 94 and still actively engaged as a trustee. He enjoys seeing his children and grandchildren doing this work with him as well. The invitation-only areas of the program areas at the Foundation have very specific strategic goals, and they focus on community health, medical research, and education. So those areas represent about 2/3 of the Foundation's annual budget. You can read more about those on the website, so I won't go into much detail on that today. But what we're here to focus on is the Small Capital Grants Program. It is an open application, and it's a responsive program at the Foundation because the trustees want to make sure that they are supporting a wide range of community needs. So the program was launched in 2004 and since then has supported over 200 organizations and awarded over $8.4 million for one-time capital expenses that will really help these organizations better serve their clients and meet their mission. So the nonprofits are in Greater Boston as well as select gateway cities in eastern Massachusetts that the Foundation has chosen to prioritize. Here you can see a small sample of the many different organizations, the cities, the types of projects that have been supported through the program. If you'd like to see a list of all the organizations that have been supported, you can go to our website, and at the bottom of the Small Capital Grants page, there is a link to the full list that looks like this. It shows you every grant that was made under this program from 2004 to today. And on the website, there are also slightly more detailed descriptions of the projects that have been funded over the past 5 years to give you a sense of where the trustees have been focusing their work. So we do have 2 deadlines a year. We call them our spring and fall rounds, which you'll see noted here and on the website. Typically, the spring deadline is in February, March, and then this fall deadline is in September, October, so September 25th this year. On average, there are about 10 to 12 projects that are funded each round, and while the grants can range from $10,000 to $50,000, the average grant is roughly $25,000 to $30,000. At a high level, this snapshot shows the breakdown of all the grants from 2004 to today by city, by issue area, and by project type. So I'll give everyone a moment to read the slide. And as a reminder, you can zoom in if you need to using the View tool if you want to look at something more closely. So while this covers the whole history of the program, I will say that over the past several years, we have seen more grants in gateway cities, as well as an increase in requests for technology and equipment compared to some of the earlier days. And I do want to highlight that this is a very competitive program. In our most recent round this past spring, we received over 70 proposals, and 16 organizations were then selected for site visits and further diligence. And in the end, the trustees selected 12 projects for funding, so that was about a 16% funding rate. So this chart just shows the history of our applications received each year and the percent that were funded. So it has varied over the years how many have come in, but the funding rate of 10 to 15% is fairly consistent. This is a screenshot of our website. Hopefully you have all been there already as you signed up for the webinar. You can find a lot of information on the eligibility and requirements on this page, so I won't go into too much detail here. We'll get into some nuance in the frequently asked questions section, but I just simply want to call out that this page should have the information you need to get a better sense of if your organization and your specific project's eligibility, but we will also have some time for questions later as well. So now we'll get into the good part. So we'll cover the top 10 questions that we hear most often about the Small Capital Grants Program. So first off, which cities and towns fall into the Foundation's funding area? When we talk about Greater Boston, we say that roughly within Route 128 is the boundary. There's certainly some wiggle room. It's really about where the organization is serving its clients rather than exactly where your headquarters might be. And the 7 gateway cities that the Foundation has prioritized are Brockton, Chelsea, Fall River, Lawrence, Lowell, Lynn, and New Bedford. And those are all listed on the website if you need to find them again. We know there are many other cities across the Commonwealth as well as gateway cities specifically, but those are the areas where the trustees have selected to focus. And their preferred approach is to work with organizations that are serving low-income communities. So next question we often get is, what do you consider capital and what projects are not eligible for this program? So things that are not eligible are general program or operating support, staff time, or blanket indirect costs. But that being said, if there is, say, a renovation project that includes labor, or you've requested computers or other hardware that requires setup by an IT consultant, those costs are eligible. So a request can't be part of a larger capital campaign since the trustees want the grant to cover the full cost of a particular project. So when it comes to capital, it's things like facility improvements, though you do need to have a long-term lease or own your building because the trustees aren't looking to make the facility improvements unless there's certainty that your organization will be in that location for quite some time. So that could be things like bathroom renovations or renovating program or office space. And then certainly vehicles are something we see a lot of, so vans and things like that. But that would not include fuel, insurance, or maintenance charges. Trustees do fund technology and equipment like computers, projectors, cameras, things like that. And then furniture, desks, tables, chairs, that could be either for an office or for programming space. Ultimately, the Foundation is looking to support durable goods. So it's not soft costs for things like maintenance, service programs, or software. Trustees won't fund development of a website or a mobile app or things like evaluation software, but they want to see more concrete items. So ultimately, I end up encouraging everyone to think about your list of needs and ask for what you need most. And in the end, requests don't really tend to be as competitive if they're like a long laundry list of all your different capital needs, but instead it could be multiple items, but they really go together with a clear purpose, and you can provide a cohesive story as to why that particular list of items would improve your work in a significant way. We're often asked if we'll consider an organization with an annual operating budget over $5 million. So this is a bit of a gray area as it's not a hard and fast rule. However, there's also a preference for organizations with operating budgets under $3 million. So the larger an organization is, the higher the bar becomes to move through the process. Trustees are willing to consider larger organizations, particularly if, say, there's a smaller program within this larger agency that does have its own small budget. Or sometimes we'll see organizations that get significant pass-through federal funding, so the budget for the organization is very large, but the room for actual operating capital is very small. So you have the ability to explain those circumstances around the budget in your proposal. And I'm happy to discuss any specific cases with folks offline But the bottom line is that it's not a 100% hard and fast rule, so I wanted to make sure that I covered that today. A question came up recently about if you can apply for funds across multiple project types, so meaning if you could do technology and furniture and a vehicle. So you can certainly cover multiple project types with your request. I'd say the thing we probably see the most is technology and furniture together. But keep in mind what I mentioned earlier about not having a long laundry list of unrelated items. And then when you are completing the application, I would ask that you select the project type from the drop-down menu that represents the biggest percentage of your request. So if someone asks for a vehicle and some furniture and the van's the largest portion of the request, then I would ask them to categorize that project as vehicle. Will the foundation fund projects that have already been started or completed? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So it's not retroactive funding. I'll share the timeline in more detail in a bit, but for this upcoming deadline, if a project is selected, funds will be available in early February, or if you wait and apply in the spring round, then funds are typically dispersed in June. So if you do envision that your project would need to be completed before then, unfortunately the funds can't be applied retroactively. Can the funds be used to meet a matching or challenge grant? That is possible as long as you have already secured the matching grant. So the intention of the program is that these funds would be used and the project's ready to go as soon as it's been approved. So you would not be able to take a grant from the foundation and then use that as a match to raise the remainder of a budget for a project. But if you already did have funding secured, say from an organization like the Mass Cultural Council, then yes, you could apply the foundation gift towards that match requirement if the full cost of the project was then covered and able to move forward. A hard question I often get is, what are the trustees looking for in this program and what makes a strong proposal? It's certainly a challenge because almost all of the proposals that we receive do meet the basic eligibility criteria. So it comes down to balancing the interests of the 15 trustees, and they're really looking to create a slate of projects that support different issue areas, different geographies, different size organizations. So it is a bit more of an art than a science when it comes down to it. But I certainly would say that for us, an application can be concise. Bullets are great to use if you want. When we ask about the organization overview and description, feel free to use language that you've written for other proposals that cover the basics. You don't need to fill the whole word count. We just want it to be clear and a focused explanation of the work that you're doing. And then particularly when it comes to the project description, why that project is so important to your work, how it's going to help you either deepen your impact or grow the number of clients you can serve. So I think you can also help us understand if there's any external context that we should know about in your community that's impacting your organization or your need for the project. Has another organization closed and you're trying to meet the additional demand, or is there some opportunity with city, state, or other funding, and by completing this project you could really leverage that? So, focus on who you're serving, what you're trying to achieve, and how this project will help you do that is what really does make a compelling proposal for the trustees. Including quantitative information is very helpful, but qualitative is also great to see. When will we find out if we're selected for funding, and when is the next application deadline? So I briefly alluded to this, but it is a two-part process. So for this round, the proposal will be due Wednesday, September 25th by 5 p.m. And I'd like to highlight that we do cut off the deadline at 5 p.m., not midnight, like perhaps other funders may. And then by mid-November, the trustees will have selected roughly 15 organizations, give or take, to have site visits and then provide further information like board lists, financial statements, things like that. And then around mid-January, the final decisions will be made with typically 10 to 12 organizations that would be selected for funding. Because we have the two deadlines a year, then it's quite soon again for the cycle to start. And while the exact date has not yet been set, the next deadline will be in February or March of 2020, with those decisions expected to be made by mid-June. If you're not selected for funding, there is no waiting period before you can apply again, so it could be the next round if you'd like. I do tend to share with people that if a specific project has been turned down, it's generally not advisable to apply for the exact same project again in the next round if it wasn't successful the first time. If you are selected for funding, then the waiting period is 2 years from the round that you applied. So folks that were funded in the fall of 2017 are just now eligible to apply again in the fall of 2019. And finally, a question we hear often is, what's the difference between a small capital grant and a mid-sized capital grant? So the mid-sized capital grants are for projects that are awarded between $250,000 to $3 million, and these are much bigger capital projects, very transformative for organizations and communities. It is definitely the most competitive program at the foundation. I think we had almost 40 inquiries last year, and only one full proposal was invited out of all that, which then was ultimately funded. And just for reference, that was Community Teamwork in Lowell. There is a rolling deadline for the mid-sized capital grants, but we will be reviewing this latest group of LOIs in early October. So if you do have a project that might fit for that program as well, there is a deadline by de facto of September 16th if you want to be considered this fall. Otherwise, it may be a few months before the LOIs are reviewed again. So related to that, you can apply for both the small and the mid-sized capital grant programs if you have needs that fit both criteria. They are separate programs, and if you apply for one or the other or get funded for one or the other, they get looked at separately, so there's no impact on that front. I see some questions here. One is, what is considered a long-term lease? So typically, it's 5 to 10 years would be considered long-term. And then another question about the cities and towns in the funding area. So just briefly, it's Greater Boston, roughly within the 95 Route 128 corridor, and then 7 gateway cities, which you can find listed on the Foundation's website. All right, we'll move on now. So I'll take you quickly through a few screenshots showing what you can expect when you're ready to apply. We moved to a new database and online application system about 18 months ago. So for those of you whose organizations have applied in the past, you can reach out to us and we can send you a temporary password so you can log in without having to register again. Even if you're unsure if your organization has applied, please feel free to reach out. That will just prevent us from creating duplicate organizations in our system, and we'd appreciate that. One point I'd like to note is that if there are any consultant grant writers on the call, definitely reach out to us because you'll need to have different emails for the different organizations that you are working with. If you are a first-time applicant, once you get to this page, you'll click the register button at the bottom and you'll be taken to a brief eligibility quiz. So the first question asks about 501c3 status, and please note you are eligible to apply if your organization has a fiscal sponsor. That's fine, you'll just choose that option. But either way, you'll take this quick quiz to say the organization's not a political campaign or an individual, that you're fit within our service area, and that you have reviewed our website, and then you're eligible to apply. So once you complete this section, you'll be taken to fields where you can fill in your organization's information. But there is a button at the top of that page for you to search the IRS database to select your organization. This will then auto-populate a lot of the fields with the information from the IRS database. Once you finish registering, you would be able to make some changes once you log in if something was not accurate, if you had maybe moved recently and it hadn't, caught up yet. You would just fill in a few remaining fields, and then you'd be able to move into the application portal. So this is what you'll see when you log in. At the top of the page, there are buttons to update your personal profile, your organization profile, and to change your password. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to see the buttons for applying now for the Small Capital Grants Program for this deadline, or you could start an LOI for the Mid-Sized Capital Grants Program. And then below the profile buttons and to the right, you'll see a section called My Applications. If you're an organization that has applied in the past, you may have an application under the Inactive tab. If you do decide to start a proposal for this deadline, it would show up under the In Progress tab. So you're able to come back and work on it in multiple sittings, so you don't have to finish it at one time. If you do want to add other contacts who could work on it, then please reach out and we can help you with that. If you are ultimately selected for funding, then the bottom section here that says requires attention would be where you'd see other actions you need to take, like uploading a signed grant agreement or submitting reports. So great. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Those are a lot of the questions that we get, so I hope it did cover many of yours, but I'm sure there are others out there, so we would like to use the rest of our time today to answer any other questions you may have. So I do see we have a few coming into the Q&A box here. So will you go over the budget limitations again? No one over $5 million annual budget. So that's not a hard line. There is a preference for organizations with annual operating budgets under $3 million, but if you can sort of explain why it still fits, because perhaps your organization, you're requesting funds for a smaller program within your larger organization, or if you're a larger organization that has a lot of federal pass-through funds, and you have a very limited supply of open operating capital, you can sort of explain those requirements. If you do have further questions, we can talk about that individually after. Let's see. There seems to be a similar question also along those budget lines. If you do have some specific questions, please do. You'll see on the website there's a link to sign up for an individual call. So please do just call me, set up a time so we can just talk through the specifics of your budget question. And then there's another question talking about most of the awards seem to be for beneficiary client-facing infrastructure. It does sound like back office needs are also considered. So can I speak to how these types of applications are weighed both for small and mid-sized applications? So for the Small Capital Grants Program, I think both program, client-facing, and back office are considered equally. So I think, an organization just makes the case for why that particular technology or infrastructure is really important and critical for their work. So I don't think there's any preference of weighting towards back office versus client-facing. So the trustees have chosen to fund both. For the mid-sized capital grants, that type of technology and infrastructure would not make the bar. It really is more typically around the actual physical capital renovations and build-outs. So it's not often technology, or technology may be a small piece, but it's usually a bigger build-out with the mid-sized capital grants program. So I think those are the questions we have right now. Hopefully, if you have other questions, please do feel free to type them in the Q&A box right now, just so we can ensure that if others have the same question, then they can do that. All right, well, it seems like we've done a really good job of covering questions, I guess. I'll give a few more minutes in case there are other questions that might apply to a lot of applicants. Otherwise, again, we are able to schedule individual follow-up calls if there are very specific questions that you might have. One question that sometimes we get is if newly formed nonprofits, young organizations are excluded, or if they are eligible for consideration. I will say that it doesn't happen often that they're funding very brand new nonprofits because, you know, the trustees are looking for some measure of a track record to just show that, particularly with these type of capital investments that are meant to have to last quite some time, that an organization, you know, has some longevity and is making an impact in the community. So unfortunately, these don't tend to go to very early stage organizations. There's a specific question about working with a school in Lawrence, so I think that's quite specific, so why don't you schedule a time to follow up and have a call about that. If related to the question about young organizations, if 3 years is too young, I think I wouldn't say there's any sort of set line. I think if you have you know, established some measure of track record of the work that you're doing, but again, happy to chat about that. Question on the technology equipment. Yes, it's the setup is also included. So if you need an IT consultant to assist with setting up new computers and things like that, that would be an eligible line item for the program. All right, so I think those are the questions we have for now. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I hope that this has been a helpful session. We've hosted a few info sessions over recent deadlines, so we'd greatly appreciate any feedback you have to share. A brief survey will pop up after this ends, so we'll also be sharing the recording, so you can look for an email with that tomorrow. Definitely please feel free to reach out with other questions. Contact info is here on the screen, as well as that link to schedule a 15-minute call, which you can also find on our website. And again, I'll just remind you to please request a login if your organization's applied to the foundation in the past, or even if you're unsure. You can reach out to me or my colleague Dave using the info@smithfamilyfoundation.net, and we'll double check that for you. All right, so I think that's all we have today, so thank you very much. We appreciate you spending this time, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll look forward to lots of great proposals coming in for this deadline. Thank you so much, and good luck.